Pedro Saucedo was watching the road ahead when a flash of light cut across the dark sky outside Levelland. The truck was moving through open country. The headlights reached out over the blacktop, then faded into empty Texas night. On both sides of the road, the land was flat and hard to read. Just dark fields, low brush, and the kind of distance that made every light stand out. Joe Salaz was beside him in the passenger seat, close enough that Pedro could feel the shift when the both of them noticed the light. Pedro kept driving for a few seconds, trying to decide if what he'd seen was lightning. It had been bright enough to catch his eyes, but it hadn't spread across the sky. It had come from ahead of them, low and sharp, somewhere beyond the reach of the headlights. When the light appeared again, it wasn't just a flash anymore. It had shape. Pedro could see it moving toward the truck, bright against the road and the darkness around it. The object looked wide and solid, with a glow that made it hard to tell where the edges ended. It wasn't hanging high in the sky. It was coming in low, close enough to belong to the road in front of them. The truck started to lose power. The engine sputtered, and Pedro felt the speed fall away. The headlights weakened, and the blacktop ahead started disappearing from the edges inward. The motor died. The lights went out, and the cab dropped into darkness with Joe still sitting beside him. Pedro brought the truck to a stop. For a moment, neither man moved. Pedro stayed behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at the glow ahead of them. It was still moving. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't another vehicle. There were no headlights coming back at him, no sound of tires on the pavement, no familiar shape that he could place. He opened the door and stepped down onto the road. Behind him, Joe stayed in the truck. Pedro stood beside the cab with one hand still near the open door, looking past the hood, searching the dark for distance, for scale, for anything that would tell him how far away the object really was. The truck was the only solid thing near him, and even that felt useless with the engine dead and the lights gone. The light was closer now. It filled more of the road. The glow around it seemed to press against the dark instead of blending into it. Pedro stepped back toward the truck as the sound reached him, a rushing roar that made the open road feel suddenly too small. He turned toward the cab, but the light was already over the hood. It washed across the windshield, across the open door, across the place where Joe was still sitting inside. Pedro dropped against the truck, pressing himself low against the road. The roar moved over him, and for a few seconds, there was nothing above Pedro Saucedo but the light. The roads around Levelland, Texas were made for distance. Flat land, long highways, a horizon that could make headlights look small against the open dark. On most nights, a stalled vehicle out there would have meant something practical. A bad battery, a loose wire, a driver waiting on the shoulder, hoping the next car slowed down. But late on November 2nd, 1957, the calls coming into the Levelland police station started to sound different. Drivers were saying their engines had died. They were also saying lights had appeared near the road before it happened. And once the phone kept ringing, ordinary car trouble no longer explained the whole night. I'm your host, Robert Barber. Tonight, we're going to Levelland, Texas in 1957 to a case built around rural roads, dead engines, frightened drivers, and a police station that kept receiving calls it couldn't easily ignore. This is the story of the Levelland Incident, the night headlights failed across the Texas plains. And this is State of the Unknown. After the roar moved past him, Pedro Saucedo still had to get up. He was outside the truck down near the road, with Joe Salaz still in the cab and the dark open around them. Whatever he'd seen was no longer directly overhead, but the moment didn't settle back into normal right away. He still had to stand, look around, and try to understand why the truck had gone dead on the side of the road. Then the truck began to act like a truck again. The lights came back and the engine started. Pedro and Joe drove to Whiteface and found a phone booth. Saucedo stepped inside and called the Levelland police station. Patrolman A.J. Fowler was on duty that night. The station was quiet enough for one strange call to stand out, and late enough for the same call to sound like trouble that might not be trouble at all. Fowler picked up the phone and listened as Saucedo told him about a light or flame, a dead truck, and something passing close enough to make him drop to the ground. There wasn't anyone else at the station describing the same thing yet. There weren't officers coming through the door with matching stories. The roads around town were still just roads, and Fowler had one man on the phone telling him something that didn't sound easy to file. So Fowler doubted it. Later accounts say that he thought Saucedo may have had too much to drink, or that the story didn't sound serious enough to move on right away. The phone call ended and the station settled back into the late-night quiet. Then, the phone rang again. The next caller gave Fowler another road to mark in his mind. Jim Wheeler was driving east of Levelland when he reportedly came upon something bright sitting in the road ahead of him. It was described as egg-shaped and brilliantly lit, large enough that it didn't feel like a reflection or a distant flash. In the report, it was on the road, directly in the way. A driver on a dark road doesn't have many choices when something is sitting ahead of him. He can stop. He can try to turn around. He can keep going and hope the road clears, or he can get out and look. Wheeler's car made part of that choice for him. The engine failed and the headlights went out. Now Wheeler was sitting in a dead car with the road blocked in front of him. He got out and looked toward the object. According to the report, it rose from the road, climbed higher, and then its lights went out. After it moved away, Wheeler's car started again. Back at the police station, Fowler now had Saucedo's call and Wheeler's call sitting close together in his head. 2 men, 2 roads, 2 vehicles that reportedly failed near strange lights. Then more calls came in. A married couple driving northeast of Levelland reportedly saw a bright streak or flash while their headlights and radio failed for a few seconds. Their report didn't have the same close-up detail as Saucedo's or Wheeler's, but it put another vehicle in trouble on another road. Jose Alvarez, north of Levelland, also entered the night's reports. In the version commonly attached to the case, he encountered an object near the road and had trouble with his car as he approached. After the object moved away, his vehicle returned to normal. These calls would have come in through the phone one at a time. A voice on the line, a location, a description that probably sounded stranger each time it had to be said out loud. Fowler had to ask where they were. He had to listen for what matched and what didn't. He had to sit at the desk while the map outside town filled in through people calling from the dark. The callers were separated by distance. They weren't standing next to each other watching one light from the same place. They were on roads around Levelland, and they kept bringing the same 2 pieces back to Fowler. A strange light near the road and a vehicle that stopped working. A strange light could be misread, and a stalled vehicle could be mechanical, but the phone kept bringing those 2 things together. On those roads, a dead engine changed the situation fast. One minute, a driver was moving toward town. The next, he was stopped on the shoulder with no headlights, no engine, and no clear idea what was in the road ahead. A few minutes after midnight, Newell Wright was driving east of Levelland when his car began acting wrong. Wright was 19 years old, a Texas Tech freshman, and his report begins in a way any driver would recognize. The car didn't stop all at once, it started giving him signs. The engine sputtered. The ammeter on the dashboard moved. The car behaved as if it were running out of gas, and Wright dealt with the problem the way a driver would. He brought the car to a stop, got out, and lifted the hood. He stood beside the disabled car and looked down into the engine compartment, trying to find the one thing that would explain the trouble. He didn't find it. When Wright closed the hood and turned away from the car, he saw something on the road ahead. In his account, it was oval and flat on the bottom, glowing with a bluish-green light. It didn't look like another stalled vehicle, and it didn't give him a familiar shape he could place in the dark. Wright got back inside the car and tried to start it. The engine wouldn't start. He'd already checked under the hood. He'd already tried to solve the problem as a car problem. Now he was back inside a car that wouldn't move, watching an object on the road ahead. He waited. According to the later account, he hoped another car would come along. Wright wasn't standing in front of a room full of investigators. He was sitting alone in a dead car, waiting for another set of headlights. But none came. After several minutes, the object reportedly rose almost straight up and disappeared. Then the car worked again. Wright didn't immediately tell the police. He waited until his parents returned from a weekend trip because he was worried people would laugh at him. For Wright, the event stayed private a little longer. For Fowler, the calls kept coming. Frank Williams, described in accounts as a farmer, reported another encounter with a glowing object near a road. His car lights and engine reportedly failed, and after the object rose away, the car worked again. The witnesses weren't all using the same words. One person talked about flame. Another talked about an egg-shaped object. Wright described an oval glow on the road ahead of him. But the callers kept returning to the same helpless moment. A vehicle on a road outside Levelland, a strange light nearby, and a machine that wouldn't move until the light was gone. As the calls continued, the police station became the one fixed point in a night that just kept moving. Outside, drivers were scattered across roads and highways. Inside, Fowler was hearing the pieces arrive one at a time. The more the phone rang, the harder it became for Saucedo's first call to sit by itself. Fowler eventually moved the night beyond the desk. He contacted the sheriff and other local officers, and men who had been hearing about the reports began driving out toward the places callers had described. Patrol cars moved onto the roads around Levelland, headlights sweeping over pavement, shoulders, and open land while officers watched for whatever had been sending drivers to the phone. The reports were no longer only traveling into the police station. Local officials were now driving into the same darkness the callers had been describing. Around this same period, Ronald Martin reported one of the clearest visual encounters of the night. Martin was west of Levelland when he saw what he described as a large orange object or ball of fire. It was distant at first, more than a mile away in his account, but it came closer. Then, according to the report, it landed on the highway ahead of him. His truck died and the headlights went out. The object's glow lit the cab from the outside. Martin was inside a dead truck with a cab illuminated by something sitting in the road ahead. For about a minute, he watched it there. Then it rose vertically, and after it left, the truck worked again. Later in the night, James Long, a truck driver from Waco, reported an encounter northeast of Levelland near Oklahoma Flat Road. Long said his truck's engine and lights failed as he approached a brilliant egg-shaped object. He described the light as pulsing, almost like a neon sign. When he got out of the truck, the object reportedly shot upward with a roar and moved away. Afterward, his engine and lights returned. Sheriff Weir Clem and Deputy Pat McCulloch were out near Oklahoma Flat Road, searching when they reportedly saw an oval red light that lit the pavement in front of them for a brief moment. Patrolman Lee Hargrove and Floyd Gavin were in the area as well. Hargrove later described a strange flash down the road, low and moving fast. Fire Marshal Ray Jones also went out looking. He reported seeing a streak of light while his headlights dimmed and his engine sputtered. His vehicle didn't fully die, but he was now another local official on the roads reporting light and mechanical trouble in the same night. The official reports were shorter than the closest driver encounters. Some were only flashes. Some didn't involve a stalled vehicle. Still, the police station had sent men into the roads, and some of those men came back with sightings of their own. Levelland was a town shaped by distance. Roads connected people to farms, oil-field work, school, and the next place they needed to be. When vehicles failed in those open stretches, the land itself pressed in around the witness. The dark was not background. It was where people were stranded. And by the time the reports slowed, the roads around Levelland had become a map of separate encounters, all feeding back into one town. In the days after the reports, Levelland didn't stay contained inside local conversation. There were too many calls, too many names, too much police involvement for the story to remain a strange night around town. The reports that drew attention beyond Hockley County and Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force program assigned to investigate UFO reports, became part of the record. Once the Air Force entered the case, the night moved into an official file. This was November of 1957. The space age was no longer an idea waiting somewhere in the future. Sputnik had already changed the way people thought about what could be moving overhead. Americans were living with new technology, military secrecy, and a sky that suddenly felt more active than it had before. Sputnik had already changed the way Americans looked at the sky, and now reports from Levelland were moving beyond local roads and into Air Force files. It had ordinary roads, ordinary drivers. It had local officers responding, and it had enough strange repetition to demand an explanation. The Air Force explanation pointed toward electrical weather. Investigators referenced ball lightning, a rare glowing ball of light sometimes reported during storms. They also referenced St. Elmo's fire, an electrical glow that can appear around objects during charged weather conditions. Outside the official file, people remembered the night cars died around Levelland. They remembered glowing objects near roads, drivers stranded in the dark, and vehicles that seemed to come back to life after the lights moved away. Over time, that image became part of American UFO culture. A car stopped on an empty road while something unknown appears close enough to interfere with the machine itself. The unknown in Levelland wasn't far away in the sky. In the reports, it was beside the road, close to the headlights, close to the engine, close enough that a driver had to decide whether to stay inside or step out into the dark. And after the reports, the calls, the search, and the official explanation, the case still came back to the same unresolved point. Different people on different roads said their vehicle failed near strange lights or objects, and then worked again after those lights were gone. That's the part that Levelland never fully shook off. Let's take a look at what holds up and what may fall a little short. The strongest part of the Levelland case is the repetition. Multiple people reported strange lights or objects around the same town on the same night, and several of those reports involved vehicle trouble. Engines sputtered or died, headlights went out. In some accounts, the vehicles returned to normal after the light or object moved away. That repeated sequence makes Levelland harder to dismiss than a single light in the sky. One frightened driver on one dark road would be easier to explain away. Levelland has multiple reports close together in time, with the police station receiving calls as the night unfolded. Local officials also matter here. Fowler received the calls. The sheriff and other officers went out onto the roads. Some officials reported seeing lights themselves, and Fire Marshal Ray Jones reported a partial vehicle effect while searching. That doesn't prove what the witness saw. It does show that the event became serious enough locally that the authorities responded in real time. The setting here matters too. Levelland sits in flat West Texas country, where lights can carry across long distances and darkness can make distance hard to judge. That helps explain why witnesses may have felt exposed and disoriented out there. It also gives skeptics room to point toward misperception, weather, and ordinary vehicle problems. The biggest weakness is consistency. The object descriptions don't all match. Witnesses described flames, egg-shaped objects, oval lights, and balls of fire. Some described something sitting in the road. Others saw a streak or a light at a distance. That variation doesn't erase the reports, but it does make it harder to say every witness saw the same physical object in the same way. The official explanation focused on weather-related electrical phenomena, including ball lightning or St. Elmo's fire, along with wet electrical circuits causing vehicle problems. Ball lightning refers to a rare glowing atmospheric phenomenon often associated with storms. St. Elmo's fire is an electrical glow that can appear around pointed objects or surfaces during charged conditions. Both terms are real, but Levelland gets difficult because the weather itself is disputed. The Air Force explanation leaned on electrically active weather. Critics later argued that the area had mist or overcast conditions, but not the kind of thunderstorm activity that would neatly explain repeated ball lightning events across different roads. The vehicle failures are hard to settle too. Wet electrical circuits could explain some trouble in older vehicles, but witness reports place the failures close to lights or objects, and that timing is what kept the case alive. The problem is that the timing is difficult to prove after the fact. The vehicles weren't preserved and tested in a way that would answer that question cleanly. There was no recovered object, no clear photograph, and no instrument reading that captured the event as it happened. The investigation also has been criticized. Project Blue Book did investigate the case, but later critics argued that the work was too limited and that the official explanation came too quickly. J. Allen Hynek, who was connected to Blue Book, later expressed dissatisfaction with the ball lightning explanation. That criticism carries weight because Hynek was part of the official UFO investigation world and later became one of the most important figures in UFO research. Still, Levelland has limits. It gives us reports, a repeated pattern, police involvement, and a powerful setting. It doesn't give us physical proof of a craft, one uniform description, or a clean test of the vehicle failures. A skeptical reading can point to weather, darkness, ordinary vehicle trouble, and rumor combining into a short-lived wave of reports around Levelland. The problem is that the reports kept returning to the same practical issue: vehicles failing near lights on rural roads. A UFO reading can point to the timing of the failures, the number of reports, and the involvement of local officials. The problem there is the missing physical evidence and the uneven descriptions. That leaves Levelland in a familiar but compelling place. The story is stronger than the proof. The pattern is stronger than the physical record. And the official explanation, even if it explains some pieces, has never fully closed the case for everyone who studies it. What gets me about Levelland is how ordinary the fear is. A lot of UFO stories start with distance, a light in the sky, something moving overhead, a witness looking up from the ground trying to decide what they're seeing. Levelland feels different because the unknown comes down to the road. A truck loses power, headlights go out. A man steps out because he's trying to understand what just happened. Another driver checks under the hood because, at first, the problem still feels mechanical. A car is supposed to have a reason for failing, a wire, a battery, a bad connection, something you can point to and fix. But in these reports, the ordinary explanation keeps getting interrupted by something else. A glow in the road, a light moving low, an object close enough to make Pedro Saucedo drop beside his truck. And this is where I think these cases reach something deeper than just a question of whether a witness saw a craft. Because when people ask whether aliens are real, it's easy to treat that like a yes or no question. Either they're here or they're not. Either the witness saw something from somewhere else or they didn't. But I don't think the question feels that simple anymore. We live in a universe that is almost impossible to reduce down to what we already understand. There are billions of galaxies, billions of stars and planets that we're still discovering. So the idea that life exists somewhere else doesn't feel strange to me. Honestly, it feels stranger to assume it doesn't. The harder question is whether anything from somewhere else has ever come here. That's where I get careful. Because wanting something to be true is not the same as proving it. And a case like Levelland doesn't give us a clean answer. It gives us reports. It gives us a pattern. It gives us frightened people on dark roads, local police taking calls, and an official explanation that still leaves room for argument. But I will say this. When I hear a story like Levelland, I understand why people look at the sky differently afterward. Not because every light is a spacecraft, and not because every strange report proves visitors are here, but because sometimes the world reminds us that our explanations aren't as complete as we would want them to be. Maybe Levelland was weather, electricity, and fear moving through a small Texas town on the same night. Maybe it was something stranger. And maybe the reason this case still works is because it leaves us with a very human moment. Someone sitting in a dead vehicle on an empty road, looking at something they can't explain and realizing that whatever they thought they knew about the world might not be enough. That's the part that stays with me. Not certainty, the possibility. This has been State of the Unknown. The Levelland incident remains one of those cases where the reported pattern is stronger than the proof, and that's exactly what makes it hard to put away cleanly. Maybe it was weather, electricity, and fear moving through a small town at the same time. Maybe something really was crossing those roads and leaving dead engines behind it. What's left is the image that witnesses carried out of that night. A vehicle stopped in the dark, a strange light nearby, and a driver waiting for the machine to come back to life. If you've been enjoying these stories, leaving a rating or review in your podcast app really does help more people find the show. On Spotify, it's just a tap of the stars. On Apple Podcasts, you can even leave a short written review. I read them and I appreciate every one. And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next story, just hit follow in your podcast app so it shows up automatically when it drops. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay curious. And who knows, maybe the next strange light over town is just a plane, or weather, or somebody's headlights catching the horizon. Or maybe those little green men are closer than we think. Either way, keep your eyes on the road.